The air in the courtroom was thick with a silence that felt heavier than sound. On one side sat Eleanor Vance, a woman carved from ice and dignity, her face a mask of impenetrable calm. Opposite her, her husband of 25 years, Richard, sat with his arm draped possessively around his young, vibrant mistress, Isabella Rossi. The tension finally snapped when Isabella, unable to contain her triumph, stood and pointed a perfectly manicured finger at Eleanor. Her voice, sharp and dripping with venom, echoed off the polished wood walls for everyone to hear. "It's over, you old relic. He's mine now." A wave of shock rippled through the gallery. Richard smirked, but Eleanor didn't flinch. She simply turned to her lawyer and gave a quiet nod. He rose, and in his hand was a document that would not only end the marriage, but expose a conspiracy so dark it would shatter everyone's reality. The wife was about to play her final card, and it wasn't a divorce petition. It was a signed will. The Vance family lived a life curated for the pages of luxury magazines. Their estate in Greenwich, Connecticut wasn't just a house. It was a sprawling testament to new money desperately trying to look old. A long, winding driveway, lined with ancient oaks they'd paid a fortune to import, led to a Georgian-style mansion that overlooked the Long Island Sound. Richard Vance, the patriarch, was the architect of this empire. He had built Vance Holdings from a modest tech startup into a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate. He was charismatic, ruthless, and possessed a brand of confidence so absolute it bordered on a religion. And at his side for 25 years had been Eleanor. To the outside world, she was the perfect corporate wife, elegant, poised, and impeccable hostess who chaired the right charities and raised two perfect children, Samuel and Lily, who were now away at elite universities. What the world didn't see, and what Richard had long forgotten, was that Eleanor wasn't just an accessory. She was the bedrock. Her inheritance had provided the seed money for his first venture. Her quiet counsel had steered him away from disastrous deals. Her social grace had smoothed over his brutish business tactics, winning him allies where he would have only made enemies. She was the silent partner in every sense of the word, the ghost in his success machine. But over the past few years, the gilded cage had begun to rust from the inside. The first signs were subtle. Richard, who once shared every detail of his day, became vague. Late meetings became a nightly occurrence. Business trips stretched from days into weeks, with calls becoming shorter and more perfunctory. He started wearing a new, flashier brand of cologne and favoring suits that were cut a little too tight, a little too youthful. He was a man running from his own age, and Eleanor knew she was a living reminder of the timeline he desperately wanted to erase. She wasn't a fool. She saw the signs, the little cracks in the facade of their perfect life. A credit card bill with a charge for a 5-star hotel in their own city. A stray earring, cheap and gaudy, found in the passenger seat of his Mercedes. A whispered phone call he thought she couldn't hear his voice, dropping to a low, intimate murmur that he hadn't used with her in a decade. The confirmation came not with a bang, but with the cold, sterile glow of a computer screen. One night, unable to sleep, Eleanor found Richard's personal laptop open on his desk. A chat window was still active. The name on the screen was Isabella Rossi. She was a junior marketing executive at Vance Holdings, 28 years old, with a mane of fiery red hair and an ambition that burned just as brightly. The messages were a sickening blend of saccharine pet names and explicit plans. They weren't just sleeping together. They were building a future that had no room for Eleanor. The most chilling message was from Isabella. "When are you finally going to get rid of the old ball and chain? I want it all, Richie. Your name, your house, You're everything." Richard's reply was a knife to Eleanor's heart. "Soon, my queen. Very soon. The lawyers are already drawing up the papers. She won't know what hit her." Eleanor felt the air leave her lungs. It wasn't the hot, explosive rage she might have expected. It was a cold, terrifying clarity. The man she had built a life with, the father of her children, was not just leaving her. He was plotting against her, reducing her to an obstacle, a ball and chain to be discarded. In that moment, something within her shifted. The grief was there, a deep, tectonic pain, but it was quickly being encased in ice. If he wanted a war, she would not be a casualty. She would be the strategist. She closed the laptop, her hands steady. She went back to their master bedroom, the one they no longer truly shared, and looked at her reflection in the antique mirror. The world saw a woman who was about to lose everything. She saw a woman who had nothing left to lose, and that made her dangerous. A week later, Richard came to her in their sunroom, the place where they had once shared lazy Sunday mornings with the kids. He didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. His face was a mask of cold resolve. "Eleanor," he began, foregoing any preamble, "this isn't working anymore. I want a divorce." She looked at him, her expression unreadable. "I see. I've met someone," he continued, as if this were a minor detail. "Isabella Rossi. You may have seen her at the company galas. We're in love." "Love?" Eleanor repeated the word, tasting it like poison. "Is that what you call it? Don't be difficult, Eleanor." He scoffed, his arrogance flaring. "This is happening. My lawyers will be in touch with yours. I'll be generous, of course. You'll be well taken care of. You can keep the summer house in the Hamptons. But this house, the company, that's all mine. It's time for me to start my real life." Eleanor stood up, her posture regal. "Your real life, Richard. You wouldn't have a life at all if it weren't for me. You wouldn't have a company. You wouldn't have this house." He laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Oh, please, don't be melodramatic. You were a good partner for a time. But that time is over. Isabella understands me. She's vibrant, she's ambitious. She's the future. And I," Eleanor said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, "am the past you wish to bury." Be careful what you wish for, Richard. Sometimes the past refuses to stay dead. He simply rolled his eyes, turning to leave. "Just have your lawyer call mine. The sooner we get this over with, the better." As he walked away, Eleanor felt the ice in her veins solidify into steel. He thought this was a simple transaction, a business deal where he held all the assets. He had no idea that she had just spent the last week not crying into her pillow, but making calls. She had hired the most discreet, most ruthless private investigator in the tri-state area. She had contacted an old friend, Arthur Finch, a lawyer known less for flashy courtroom theatrics and more for a mind like a steel trap. The war had begun, and Richard hadn't even realized his opponent was on the field. He saw a wife. He should have seen a queen defending her board. The divorce proceedings began, as Richard had intended, as a brutal one-sided assault. His legal team, a pack of slick, pinstriped sharks from a top Manhattan firm, descended with the clear objective of painting Eleanor as nothing more than a glorified dependent. They filed motions claiming she was a spendthrift with no concept of financial reality, citing her charity donations and household expenses as proof of her profligacy. They subpoenaed her friends, her caterers, even the gardener, hoping to dig up any dirt that would portray her as mentally unstable or an unfit mother, despite Samuel and Lily being adults. Richard, emboldened by Isabella's constant praise, was a monster of arrogance. On the stand during his deposition, he downplayed Eleanor's contributions to his success with contemptuous ease. "My wife's role was primarily social," he stated, leaning into the microphone. "She planned parties. She was very good at it. But to suggest she had any hand in the strategic direction of Vance Holdings is frankly laughable. I built that company with my own 2 hands." Isabella was a constant presence, sitting just behind the lawyers, her expression a smug mask of victory. She attended every meeting, every deposition she was allowed into. She would touch Richard's arm, whisper in his ear, and cast triumphant glances at Eleanor. She had already moved into the Greenwich mansion, redecorating with a garish taste that favored leopard print and gold fixtures. She posted photos of herself on social media, lounging by their pool, driving his cars, wearing jewelry from his vault, some of which had been anniversary gifts to Eleanor. It was a calculated campaign of psychological warfare designed to break Eleanor's spirit. But Eleanor did not break. She remained serene, her composure a silent rebuke to their vulgarity. Her lawyer, Arthur Finch, was her perfect counterpart. A man in his late 60s with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing. Arthur was the epitome of quiet competence. He met their loud, aggressive tactics with calm, meticulous preparation. He countered their motions with detailed financial records, proving Eleanor's initial investment and subsequent fiscal prudence. He presented affidavits from former board members who recalled Eleanor's insightful contributions in the company's early days. "They're playing checkers, Eleanor," Arthur told her one afternoon in his wood-paneled office. "Loud, obvious moves. We're playing chess, and our time will come." It was during this period of immense stress that something else began to happen. Eleanor started feeling perpetually tired, a deep, bone-weary exhaustion that no amount of sleep could fix. She lost weight. A persistent dry cough settled in her chest. At first, she dismissed it as the physical toll of the divorce. But one morning, she coughed into a handkerchief and saw a small, bright fleck of red. A cold dread entirely different from the one Richard had inspired washed over her. She made an appointment with a top oncologist at Memorial Sloan Kettering, under an assumed name, paying in cash to avoid any paper trail that Richard's lawyers could find. The tests were extensive, the waiting agonizing. Finally, the doctor sat her down in a sterile, sunless room. The look on his face told her everything before he even spoke. The diagnosis was grim late-stage lung cancer, aggressive, inoperable. "With intensive treatment," the doctor said gently, "we might be able to manage it for a time. But you should be realistic, Mrs. Smith. It would be wise to get your affairs in order." Eleanor received the news with the same chilling calm she had shown Richard. This, she thought, was the universe's cruelest joke. After all her planning, all her fight, her own body was betraying her in the most final way imaginable. She walked out of the hospital into the bustling New York City streets, feeling completely detached, as if she were watching a movie of her own life. She grieved that night alone in the small, discreet apartment she had rented. She allowed herself one night to feel the crushing weight of it all. The fear, the injustice, the sorrow for the future with her children that was being stolen from her. But as dawn broke, the steel returned. The diagnosis wasn't just a death sentence. It was a weapon. It was the final perfect piece of her strategy, one she would never have chosen, but would not hesitate to use. The next day she met with Arthur Finch. She told him everything. He listened without interruption, his face impassive, but his eyes full of a deep, sorrowful empathy. "My God, Eleanor," he said softly when she finished. "What do you want to do?" We can use this. A sympathy play in court." "No," Eleanor said firmly. "No sympathy. I will not be pitied, especially not by them. We will do the opposite. We keep this a complete secret. No one knows. Not my children, not my friends, no one." Arthur looked puzzled. "But why?" "Because." Eleanor explained, a flicker of grim fire in her eyes. "Richard and Isabella believe time is on their side. They think they can just wait me out, grind me down until I accept their pittance of an offer. They are praying for my future to end, so theirs can begin. I'm going to give them exactly what they want. Or rather, I'm going to let them think they're getting it." From that moment, the plan evolved. Eleanor, guided by Arthur, began making new arrangements. The most important of these was her will. She drafted a new last will and testament, leaving the vast majority of her personal fortune, which was still substantial from her family's side, to her children. Samuel and Lily placed in a secure trust. She also included specific bequests to her most loyal friends and staff. But her private investigator, a former NYPD detective named Dave, had been busy. He wasn't just digging into Richard's finances. Eleanor had tasked him with focusing on Isabella. "A woman that ambitious doesn't appear out of nowhere," she'd told him. "Find out where she came from. Find out who she talks to." Dave's findings were interesting. Isabella came from a working-class background in Queens. She had a mountain of debt from student loans and credit cards. But more curiously, in the months leading up to her affair with Richard becoming public, she had received several large, untraceable cash deposits into a new bank account. And she was in frequent contact with a man named Marcus Thorne. The name hit Eleanor like a physical blow. Marcus Thorne had been Richard's first business partner, a brilliant but volatile software engineer. The two had a spectacular falling out a decade ago. Richard had forced him out of the company, buying his shares for a fraction of their eventual worth. Thorne had been ruined, bankrupted, and had sworn revenge. He had disappeared from their social and professional circles, but the hatred he harbored for Richard was legendary. "Isabella and Marcus Thorne," Arthur said, his brow furrowed. "That can't be a coincidence." "It's not," Eleanor replied. "Isabella is his Trojan horse." The theory was audacious. Thorne, wanting revenge, had found the perfect tool in the beautiful, greedy Isabella. He was likely funding her, guiding her, pushing her to secure Richard, get him to divorce Eleanor, and then, once married, somehow gain control of his assets. Richard, blinded by his ego and lust, was a lamb being led to slaughter, thinking he was the wolf. But they needed proof, and they needed a way to expose it all at once, in a way that would leave no doubt. "They're getting sloppy, Eleanor," Arthur said, reviewing the investigator's report. "They think they've already won. Richard is letting Isabella sit in on high-level financial meetings. He's even given her power of attorney for some minor accounts as a sign of his trust." A dark, brilliant idea began to form in Eleanor's mind. It was risky, almost unthinkable. "Arthur," she said, slowly, her mind racing. "Richard has an annual physical next week. It's mandatory for the company's key man insurance policy. Isabella will surely be with him. I need Dave to find out everything about that appointment. The doctor, the clinic, everything." She then turned to another task. She had a meeting with a lawyer. Not Arthur Finch, but a different kind of lawyer, one recommended to her by Dave. A lawyer who specialized in creating documents that looked impeccable but served a hidden purpose. The stage was being set. Richard and Isabella were swaggering towards the finish line of their divorce, ready to claim their prize. They had no idea that Eleanor, armed with the knowledge of her own mortality and a thirst for justice, had already laid a minefield right at their feet. The final act was about to begin, and it would take place in the one venue they felt most secure, the public stage of the courtroom. The day of the final hearing arrived cloaked in a grey, oppressive humidity that mirrored the atmosphere inside courtroom 4B. The room was packed. The Vance divorce had become a spectator sport among the Greenwich elite, and the gallery was a sea of familiar faces, friends, business rivals, and gossips, all eager to witness the final humiliation of Eleanor Vance. Richard arrived with Isabella clinging to his arm. He was tanned and beaming, looking every bit the victor. He wore a bespoke navy suit, a power statement. Isabella was a vision in blood-red silk, a dress that was both expensive and predatory. She scanned the room, her smile sharp and possessive, her eyes briefly locking with Eleanor's across the room. She offered a small, condescending smirk. Eleanor, by contrast, was an island of quiet composure. She wore a simple, elegant grey dress, her only adornment a string of pearls Richard had given her on their 10th anniversary, a subtle, poignant choice. She looked thinner, more fragile than before, and there were dark circles under her eyes that even her makeup couldn't fully conceal. Richard and Isabella likely saw it as proof of her defeat, the physical manifestation of a broken heart. They had no idea it was the shadow of a far greater battle being waged within her. Arthur Finch sat beside her, his briefcase resting on his lap. He gave her a reassuring look. "All the pieces are in place, Eleanor. Just stay strong." The proceedings droned on through the morning. Richard's lawyers presented their final arguments, painting him as a generous man being taken advantage of, and Eleanor as a bitter woman clinging to a lifestyle she hadn't earned. When Richard's lead attorney, a slick man named Peterson, concluded with, "Mr. Vance simply wants to move on with his life, with the woman he loves, and provide a fair but realistic settlement to his former wife." Richard reached over and squeezed Isabella's hand. Judge Albright, a stern woman with a reputation for no-nonsense justice, listened impassively. She then turned her gaze to Arthur Finch. "Mr. Finch, your response." Arthur rose slowly. "Your Honor, we contend that this is not a simple case of a marriage ending. We contend that the foundation of this divorce is built on a conspiracy of greed and deception, and that Mrs. Vance is not the one being unreasonable. In fact, she is the one being systematically targeted." Peterson jumped to his feet. "Objection, Mr. Finch is spinning baseless fantasies. There is no conspiracy." "On the contrary," Arthur said calmly, "there is, and the lead conspirator is sitting right there." He gestured not to Richard, but directly to Isabella. A gasp went through the courtroom. Isabella's face flushed with anger. "This is outrageous. He can't just accuse me of things." "Settle down, Ms. Rossi." Judge Albright warned, her voice sharp. "You are a guest in this courtroom. Miss Finch, you're making a serious allegation. You'd better have more than theories." "I do, Your Honor," Arthur said. "But before I present our evidence, I believe Miss Rossi has something she'd like to say. She seems quite eager to contribute." He looked directly at Isabella, a challenge in his eyes. It was the perfect bait. Isabella, brimming with arrogance, and seeing this as her moment to publicly stake her claim, fell for it completely. She couldn't help herself. All the pent-up resentment, all the triumph she felt, came bubbling to the surface. She stood up, her red dress like a slash of blood in the muted courtroom. Richard tried to pull her back down, whispering, "Isabella, no." But she shook him off. She pointed a trembling, furious finger across the room at Eleanor. Her voice, shrill and laced with venom, pierced the silence. "You're damn right I have something to say. This whole thing is a joke. You lost Eleanor. Do you hear me? You are old news, a relic. He doesn't want you. He wants me. He loves me. She turned her head, her fiery hair whipping around, and gestured wildly at the mansion, the company, everything. All of this. It was never really yours. You were just keeping it warm for me. It's our time now. He's mine now. The final declaration. He's mine now. Hung in the air, an admission so brazen, so shocking, that the entire room fell into a stunned silence. Reporters in the back furiously scribbled in their notepads. Richard's face had gone pale, a mask of horror replacing his smug grin. He had completely lost control. Judge Albright's face was thunderous. Ms. Rossi, you will sit down and be silent, or I will have you removed for contempt of court. Your outburst has been noted for the record. Isabella, suddenly realizing her catastrophic mistake, sank back into her chair, her face ashen. But Eleanor didn't react with anger or hurt. Instead, a look of profound, chilling calm settled on her features. This was the moment, the checkmate she had been waiting for. She leaned over and whispered to Arthur. Now. Arthur Finch nodded grimly. He turned back to the judge, his voice steady and clear, cutting through the residual shock in the room. Your Honor, in light of Ms. Rossi's very public declaration of her perceived partnership with Mr. Vance and her future intentions regarding his estate, her statement serves as a crucial piece of context for our next exhibit. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a sheaf of papers bound in a neat legal cover. He walked to the clerk and handed it over. We would like to submit this document into evidence. Peterson Richards' lawyer was on his feet again. Objection. What is this? The discovery period is over. We haven't seen this document. It is a new development, counsel, Arthur replied smoothly. One that only became relevant in the last 48 hours. I believe the court will find it most illuminating. Judge Albright took the document from the clerk. She adjusted her glasses, her eyes scanning the first page. A flicker of utter astonishment crossed her face. She looked up first at Richard, then at Isabella, and finally at Eleanor. The judge's expression was no longer just stern, it was deeply troubled. Mr. Finch, she said, her voice low and serious. Can you explain to the court what this document is? Arthur looked at Richard, whose face was now a canvas of confusion and dawning dread. Certainly, Your Honor, Arthur said, his voice resonating with gravitas. The document you are holding is the last will and testament of Mr. Richard Vance. A wave of confusion swept the room. A will. Why was that relevant in a divorce? And, the judge prompted. It was signed 2 days ago, Your Honor, Arthur continued. It names a new primary beneficiary to his entire estate, including all controlling shares in Vance Holdings in the event of his death. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. He then turned his gaze upon Isabella Rossi, who looked like she had seen a ghost. It leaves everything, Arthur announced, his voice like the tolling of a bell, to Miss Isabella Rossi. Chaos erupted. Richard stared open-mouthed, first at Arthur, then at Isabella, a look of profound betrayal dawning on his face. What I never, he stammered. But you did, Richard, Eleanor said, speaking for the first time, her voice soft but carrying across the courtroom. You signed it, right after your physical. The lawyer Isabella so helpfully recommended said it was just a formality. A simple update to your living will, didn't she? Judge? Albright slammed her gavel down. Order. Order in this court. She looked down at the document again, then at the signature page. It was clearly Richard Vance's signature, notarized and witnessed. Then she looked back at Arthur Finch, a silent question in her eyes. How did you get this? And what does it really mean? The trap had been sprung. The will wasn't just a document about a future inheritance. It was the key that would unlock a conspiracy of attempted murder. And Eleanor Vance had just handed it to the judge. The courtroom was a pressure cooker of confusion and suspicion. Richard Vance looked at Isabella, his face a mask of disbelief and dawning horror. A will? What are they talking about? I didn't sign a will. Isabella's face was chalky white. Richie, darling, it's a misunderstanding. They're lying. It was just an update to your healthcare proxy. The lawyer said. Her voice trailed off as she saw the predatory stillness in Arthur Finch's eyes. She knew in that moment that she was caught. Your Honor, Arthur said, his voice cutting through the noise. If you'll examine the witnesses on the signature page, you'll find they were a notary and a paralegal from a firm I'm quite certain Mr. Vance has never heard of. A firm, however, that has received substantial payments from one Mr. Marcus Thorne. The name dropped like a bomb. Richard flinched as if he'd been struck. Thorne. What the hell does he have to do with this? Everything, Arthur stated flatly. He turned to face Richard directly. Mr. Vance, you recently had your annual physical, did you not? At the Kensington private clinic. Yes, Richard answered, bewildered. For my insurance policy. And Ms. Rossi accompanied you, correct? She insisted on being there for moral support. Yes, she was there. So what? And after your examination, Arthur continued, his tone methodical, like a surgeon making incisions. While you were still feeling a bit groggy from the sedative you were given for a minor endoscopic procedure you underwent? Ms. Rossi introduced you to a lawyer. She said it was urgent a chance to update some paperwork while you were there. She presented you with a stack of documents, told you it was a standard living will and healthcare directive, and you signed them. Is that not what happened? The color drained from Richard's face. He remembered. The blurriness, the nurse telling him he'd feel a little out of it for a few hours. He remembered Isabella's insistent whispering, guiding his hand as he scrawled his name on page after page. She said it was to make her my emergency contact, he stammered, looking at Isabella with pure terror. She is much more than your emergency contact in this document, Mr. Vance, Judge Albright said grimly, holding up the will. She is your sole heir. But that's not the most disturbing part, Your Honor, Arthur interjected. The why is far more important than the how. He signaled to an assistant who wheeled a presentation board into the courtroom. For the past 2 months, my client, Mrs. Vance, has had a private investigator looking into Ms. Rossi and her associates. The first board showed large, blown-up bank statements. These are the accounts of Ms. Isabella Rossi. For a junior executive on a $60,000 salary, she lives quite well. That's because she was receiving monthly cash deposits funneled through a series of shell corporations. The source of those funds, Marcus Thorne. The second board showed phone records, hundreds of calls and encrypted texts between Isabella and Thorne, dating back over a year, long before she and Richard had even started their affair. Their plan was simple yet diabolical. Arthur explained, his voice ringing with authority. Mr. Thorne, seeking revenge for his financial ruin at the hands of Mr. Vance, recruited Ms. Rossi. Her job was to seduce Mr. Vance, convince him to divorce his wife, cutting off the one person who truly watched his back, and then marry him. The will was the final piece of the puzzle. He paused, letting the implication hang in the air. Once Miss Rosie was legally his wife and sole heir, Mr. Vance's life expectancy would have plummeted dramatically. "This is insane," Peterson Richards' lawyer shouted. "You have no proof of any intent to harm—" "Don't I?" Arthur shot back. He pulled another file from his briefcase. "This is a sworn affidavit from a nurse at the Kensington Clinic. She was on duty during Mr. Vance's procedure. She states that Ms. Rosie showed an unusual and persistent interest in Mr. Vance's post-procedure medication. Specifically, she kept asking if he was prescribed blood thinners for his heart condition. When the nurse confirmed he was Ms. Rosie, asked for the specific dosage and brand name, claiming she wanted to help manage his prescriptions. Arthur then presented a report from a toxicologist. "We also have this. My investigator obtained the vial of vitamin B12 shots that Ms. Rosie had so thoughtfully prepared for Mr. Vance to boost his energy during the stress of the divorce. It contains no B12. It contains a highly concentrated, unregulated anticoagulant, a substance that, when combined with his prescribed blood thinner, would have induced a massive, untraceable cerebral hemorrhage within weeks. A tragic accident." The courtroom was utterly silent. The sheer cold-bloodedness of the plot was breathtaking. Richard Vance wasn't just losing his wife. He was the prize in a deadly game he never even knew he was playing. His swagger, his arrogance, his entire world-view shattered in that instant. He was not the master of the universe. He was a fool, a pawn, a target. He slowly turned his head to look at Isabella. The beautiful, vibrant woman he had lauded as his future was now a monster. Her face was a contorted mask of fear and fury. Their eyes met, and in his there was no love. No anger, just the primal terror of a man who has stared into his own grave. "You," he whispered, his voice cracking. "You were going to kill me." Isabella didn't answer. She lunged to her feet and made a desperate dash for the courtroom doors. But two burly court officers, anticipating the move on a signal from Judge Albright, intercepted her easily. "Let go of me!" she shrieked, her facade of sophistication completely gone, revealing the desperate creature beneath. "He's lying. It's all lies." As they restrained her, Judge Albright's voice cut through the chaos cold as a winter wind. "Isabella Rossi, you are under arrest on suspicion of conspiracy to commit murder. Marcus Thorne was apprehended by police less than an hour ago. He is already cooperating." The trap had not just been sprung. It had snapped shut with brutal finality. As Isabella was led away, sobbing and screaming, all eyes turned to Eleanor. She hadn't moved. She hadn't gloated. She simply watched the destruction she had so meticulously orchestrated her expression, one of profound, sorrowful victory. Richard stared at her, his face a ruin of shame and regret. He had tried to discard her, to cast her aside like a broken object, but she had been the only one standing between him and a horrific death. He had called her a relic of the past, but she had just saved his future, and in doing so she had taken everything from him, not out of spite, but out of necessity. The great Richard Vance was finally utterly unraveled. With Isabella's hysterical shrieks fading down the hallway, a new kind of silence fell upon the courtroom. The heavy, weighted silence of consequence. The gallery, which had assembled for a society scandal, had instead witnessed the anatomy of a murder plot. The reporters were no longer scribbling gossip. They were documenting a story that would lead the national news. Judge Albright surveyed the scene, her face etched with disgust. She looked at Richard, who was slumped in his chair, a broken man. His expensive suit now seemed like a costume on a scarecrow. His lawyer, Peterson, stood beside him, utterly defeated, the wind knocked out of his sails. "Mr. Peterson," the judge said, her voice devoid of any warmth, "in light of the evidence of conspiracy, fraud, and attempted murder presented here today, all of which directly involves your client as the intended victim and his assets as the motive, I am finding it impossible to proceed with this divorce hearing as planned. The circumstances have fundamentally changed." She took off her glasses and rubbed her temples. "The immediate concern of this court is no longer the division of assets, but the preservation of them from criminal enterprise and the protection of the Vance family." She turned her gavel over in her hand. "Therefore, I am making the following rulings effective immediately." Every word landed like a hammer blow. "First, all civil proceedings in this divorce are hereby stayed. Instead, I am invoking the court's power to issue an emergency order. All personal and corporate assets of Richard Vance and Vance Holdings are hereby frozen pending a full criminal investigation and a forensic audit to determine the extent of Marcus Thorne's infiltration and Isabella Rossi's fraudulent activities." Richard's head shot up. "Frozen, Your Honor." "You can't. My company." "Your company, Mr. Vance," the judge cut him off, "was nearly used as the prize in your own murder. The board and the shareholders need to be protected from your catastrophic lack of judgment. Second," she continued, "given the clear and present danger you invited into your home and your life, I find that you have acted with extreme negligence concerning the well-being of your family. Therefore, I am awarding sole and exclusive use of the Greenwich family residence to Mrs. Eleanor Vance. Third, full and sole legal and physical custody of your 2 children, Samuel and Lily, is granted to Mrs. Vance. While they are adults, this ruling pertains to all legal matters of guardianship and inheritance trusts until the criminal case is resolved. Finally," she said, looking directly at Richard, "your petition for divorce from Mrs. Vance is denied. However, Mrs. Vance's counter-petition is granted on the grounds of extreme cruelty and endangerment. But the financial settlement will be determined after the criminal investigation reveals what, if anything, is left of your fortune once the fraud has been untangled. Based on the evidence of conspiracy to defraud the company, I suspect it will be substantially less than you imagine." She banged the gavel, the sound echoing the finality of a coffin lid closing. "This court is adjourned." Richard Vance sat motionless, staring into the void. He had lost everything. Not his money that was just frozen. He had lost his pride, his reputation, his family's trust, and his self-respect. He had been played for a fool on the grandest stage imaginable, and the woman he had tried to destroy had saved his life only to preside over the complete dismantling of it. Later that evening, Eleanor sat in the quiet library of the Greenwich home, her home now. The gaudy trinkets Isabella had littered about the place had already been packed into boxes for disposal. Arthur Finch sat opposite her, a glass of single malt scotch in his hand. "It's done, Eleanor," he said softly. "You did it. You saved him, and you saved the company." Eleanor stared into the unlit fireplace. "I didn't do it for him, Arthur. I did it for my children. I did it so that Snake and her puppet master wouldn't steal their legacy." "And what about you?" Arthur asked, his voice gentle. "We never spoke of it again, but your diagnosis. How are you truly?" Eleanor allowed a small, tired smile to touch her lips for the first time in months. This was the final piece of the story, the one only she and Arthur knew. "It's a funny thing, the power of a diagnosis," she said. She reached into a drawer and pulled out a medical file, a different one from the one she had first shown him. I did have a spot on my lung. It showed up on the initial scan. The first doctor, the one I saw under an assumed name, was overly pessimistic. He saw an older woman stressed and jumped to the worst conclusion. She opened the file. After I told you, you insisted I get a second opinion with a specialist you trusted, Dr. Matthews. He performed a biopsy. It wasn't cancer, Arthur. It was a benign nodule, a scar from a bout of pneumonia I had years ago. The exhaustion, the cough. It was all stress, the sheer crushing weight of what he was doing to me. Arthur stared at her, his mind reeling. So you knew you weren't dying. For how long? I've known for 6 weeks, she admitted. But Richard and Isabella didn't know that. They saw what they wanted to see, a weak, fading woman. They underestimated me. They all did. My illness made them reckless. It made them accelerate their plans. It made them sign that will. It was the perfect cover. I was the frail, dying wife. Who would ever suspect I was hunting them? Arthur shook his head in disbelief, a slow smile spreading across his face. It was the most brilliant, audacious, and ruthless legal maneuver he had ever witnessed. She had taken a potential tragedy and weaponized it, using her enemy's own cruelty and assumptions against them. She hadn't just played chess. She had invented a whole new game. A sound at the door made them both turn. Her children, Samuel and Lily, stood there. They had been called home from university and told everything. Their faces were pale with shock. But as they looked at their mother sitting there, not as a victim, but as a warrior, their expressions softened into awe and overwhelming love. They rushed to her, wrapping her in their arms. "Mom," Samuel whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "We are so sorry. We didn't see what was happening." Eleanor held them tight, the cold steel inside her finally melting away, replaced by the warmth of her children's love. "It's over now," she whispered, her own voice finally catching. "It's all over." She was no longer Mrs. Richard Vance, the corporate wife. She was Eleanor Vance, the woman who had faced down betrayal, conspiracy, and even the shadow of death, and had emerged not just victorious, but reborn. The reckoning was complete. The year that followed the explosive courtroom hearing was not one of quiet healing, but of public dissection. The trial of the Black Widow of Wall Street, as the tabloids quickly dubbed Isabella Rossi, became the most sensational legal drama of the decade. The media circus was relentless. Every detail of her affair with Richard, every text message from Marcus Thorne, every cold-blooded calculation was laid bare for public consumption. Isabella at first tried to play the victim. She arrived at court each day in carefully chosen demure outfits, her face a mask of tearful innocence. But under the prosecutor's relentless, methodical questioning, her facade crumbled. Her testimony was a disaster of contradictions and panicked lies. When confronted with the recording of her own triumphant courtroom declaration, "He's mine now," she finally broke, devolving into a tirade that sealed her fate, blaming Eleanor, blaming Richard, blaming everyone but herself. Marcus Thorne was the prosecution's star witness. He took the stand not with remorse, but with a chilling intellectual detachment. He detailed his decade-long grudge against Richard, explaining how he'd identified Isabella as the perfect weapon, beautiful, greedy, and underestimated. Richard Vance's greatest weakness was never his finances, Thorne stated coolly, looking directly at the jury. It was his ego. He needed to believe he was desired by a woman like Isabella. I didn't have to convince her to kill him. I just had to convince her that his death was the only way to make her inheritance ironclad. She was in that regard an eager student. The most humiliating spectacle, however, was Richard's testimony. Called as the primary witness against the woman he once claimed to love, he was forced to recount every sordid detail of their affair. He had to read his own fawning, foolish messages aloud. He had to describe in excruciating detail how he had belittled his wife, plotted to discard her, and eagerly welcomed the architects of his own near demise into his life. He was a lion who had been declawed and disgraced in the center of the arena, a walking monument to his own stupidity. On the final day of his testimony, as he stepped down from the stand, he chanced a look at Eleanor, who sat in the front row. There was no triumph in her eyes, no pity. There was nothing. It was this absolute indifference he would later realize that was the cruelest cut of all. The verdict was a foregone conclusion, guilty on all counts. As Isabella was sentenced to 25 years to life, her composure shattered completely, and she had to be physically supported as she was led away. Marcus Thorne accepted his 20-year sentence with a wry, unrepentant smirk. The drama was over. For Richard, the drama was just beginning. The forensic audit of Vance Holdings was a bloodbath. It revealed a web of fraudulent contracts and shell companies so extensive that it was a miracle the company hadn't already collapsed. To stave off bankruptcy and a barrage of shareholder lawsuits, an emergency board meeting was called. Richard walked into the boardroom he had commanded for a quarter-century and was met with a wall of cold, unforgiving faces. He was formally stripped of his title as CEO and forced to sell his controlling shares at a severely reduced price to a new investment consortium. His reign was over. His social life evaporated overnight. He was expelled from his country club for conduct unbecoming a member. Old friends and business associates would cross the street to avoid him. He once attended a charity gala, a desperate attempt to signal normalcy, only to find himself standing utterly alone, a pariah in a tuxedo. His loneliness was a palpable force. He made painful, awkward attempts to connect with his children. He called Samuel one evening, trying to talk about a new market trend, a pathetic attempt to reclaim their old dynamic. Samuel's reply was polite but glacial. "If you have insights regarding the company, Dad, you should direct them to the chairwoman. She makes the final decisions." The chairwoman. That was Eleanor now. While Richard faded into ignominy, Eleanor rose with a quiet, formidable grace. She stepped into the role not with fanfare, but with purpose. Her first act as chairwoman of the board was to reopen a sustainable technology division that Richard had mockingly shuttered 5 years prior, calling it Eleanor's pet project. She had always believed in it. With her guidance and funding within a year, the division patented a new water purification technology that became immensely profitable and globally significant. It was a stunning vindication of the vision he had ridiculed. She brought her children into the fold, not as Nepo babies, but as valued colleagues. Samuel, with his sharp financial mind, became CFO. Lily, a natural marketer with a keen sense of social responsibility, headed the new philanthropic foundation. The Vance Holdings boardroom, once a den of chest-thumping egos, became a place of collaboration and respect. Eleanor didn't rule with fear. She led with wisdom, her deep institutional knowledge of the company proving to be its greatest asset. She poured her newfound influence into her foundation, focusing on a cause that now held a deep personal resonance, creating shelters and providing legal aid for women escaping financially abusive and coercive relationships. She was giving other women the tools to fight back the tools she had been forced to forge for herself. One crisp autumn afternoon, almost 2 years after the trial, Eleanor was in the gardens of her Greenwich estate. The chaotic, ostentatious plantings favoured by Richard had been replaced with elegant, structured beds of English roses and lavender. The garden was a reflection of her calm, beautiful and thriving. She was no longer just surviving. She was flourishing. She thought of Richard not with anger, but with a distant, clinical pity. He had been a chapter in her life, a storm she had weathered. He was not her defining story. Her phone buzzed, interrupting her thoughts. It was a group text from Samuel and Lily. It contained a photo of the two of them standing in front of a new building in Singapore, the company's Asian headquarters. They were both beaming, holding a plaque between them. The text below the image read, "The Eleanor Vance Innovation Center is officially open. The next chapter begins. All because of you, Mum. We love you." A slow, genuine smile spread across Eleanor's face. She looked at the picture of her children, confident and happy, building a future on the foundation she had secured for them. She looked around at her peaceful, orderly garden. The war was long over. The ghosts were gone. This wasn't a gilded cage anymore. It was simply home. It was a new dawn, and for the first time in a very long time, she was looking forward to the sunrise. There are moments in life that test the very core of who we are. For Eleanor Vance, that moment came when she was publicly discarded, underestimated, and targeted by those she should have been able to trust the most. But this story isn't just about the shocking greed of a mistress or the blind arrogance of a husband. It's a powerful testament to the quiet, unshakable strength that lies within those who are counted out. It's a reminder that the loudest voice in the room isn't always the most powerful, and that justice sometimes isn't about revenge. It's about meticulously, brilliantly taking back your life. If you were moved by Eleanor's incredible story of strategy and survival, and if you believe in the power of intelligence over brute force, show your support by hitting that like button. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder of their own strength. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications for more true stories of unexpected triumphs and justice served. Thank you for listening.
Millionaire husband's pregnant wife thought he was faithful until she found out about his mistress. They seemed like the perfect couple, a power duo that graced every high-profile charity gala, always arm in arm, smiling for the cameras. Clarissa Farnsworth was the envy of every socialite in town, refined, dazzling, and wealthy beyond imagination. Her husband, Sebastian Farnsworth, was hailed as a genius entrepreneur, a philanthropist who rubbed shoulders with the likes of Bill Gates and Richard Branson. Their fairy tale union appeared unbreakable until Clarissa discovered a secret that shattered the facade of loyalty she once cherished. Hidden within their lavish world was a betrayal so deep that no amount of money or influence could fix it. Buckle up, because this story is about to get explosive. Clarissa Farnsworth was born Clarissa Wellington, the only child of famed hotel magnate Lawrence Wellington. Renowned for his real estate ventures across Europe, Lawrence instilled in her both a strong sense of business and a tender heart for those less fortunate. Raised in a sprawling estate outside London, Clarissa could have become the stereotypical rich heiress, spoiled, self-absorbed, drifting through life with no true aim. But from an early age, she clung to her mother's example. Evelyn Wellington was a gentle philanthropist who quietly donated to orphanages and women's shelters under various pseudonyms, never seeking the public eye. Clarissa, moved by her mother's humility, grew up believing wealth was a tool for helping others, not a license for egotism. After finishing her education at Oxford, Clarissa ventured to New York to work with UNICEF, focusing on educational programs in underprivileged areas. It was an act that raised eyebrows among her high society friends, who expected her to settle into a comfortable role in her father's enterprise. But Clarissa was determined to carve out her own identity. She spent 3 years volunteering in challenging regions, witnessing the stark reality of poverty. Those experiences molded her spirit, and upon returning home, she discovered a new purpose: to create her own charitable foundation for women's education. But life has a way of weaving unexpected threads into the tapestry of our plans. At a charity gala in London, an event hosted by Sir Jonathan Crawley in support of the Royal Children's Hospital, Clarissa stumbled upon the man who would become her greatest joy, then her greatest sorrow. Sebastian Farnsworth was introduced to her by a mutual friend, Lady Isabel Montague. Sebastian was already making headlines back then, a financial prodigy who had turned a modest inheritance from his grandmother into a thriving hedge fund. People whispered reverently about his golden touch. The rumor mill claimed that if Sebastian Farnsworth invested in a project, it would inevitably blossom into a fortune. He was tall, magnetic, and possessed a quiet confidence that intrigued Clarissa. They spoke about philanthropy, sustainable business, and the future of humanitarian aid. He listened intently as she shared her dreams of establishing her own foundation. Sebastian seemed more than eager to offer advice, even potential financial backing. By the end of the gala, they agreed to meet again to discuss her proposed foundation in more detail. That second meeting took place in a chic cafe in Mayfair, and it felt more like a date than a business consultation. Conversation flowed easily between them. He told her tales of how he had grown up in a modest suburban home before inheriting his grandmother's estate. Clarissa, unaccustomed to men who truly listened and appreciated her intellect, found herself irresistibly drawn to his gentle manner. Within months, they were inseparable, attending events together, their names cropping up in tabloids as the Knew-It couple. By the time Sebastian proposed, whisking her away on a surprise weekend trip to the Lake District, complete with a romantic boat ride at sunset, Clarissa was already convinced her life would be perfect by his side. In her eyes, marriage was not just a union of hearts, but a partnership of ideals, of philanthropic intentions to shape the world for the better. Little did she know how drastically that vision would crumble in the not-so-distant future. Their wedding was the event of the season. Guests flew in from across the globe. Dignitaries, celebrities, and business moguls filled the Farnsworth ancestral mansion in the English countryside. The tabloids buzzed for weeks, capturing every detail from Clarissa's exquisite Vera Wang gown to the rumored $1 million floral arrangements. People marveled at how the Farnsworths had spared no expense, even flying in a rare orchestra from Vienna to entertain the guests. Yet, behind the opulent facade, Clarissa's philanthropic spirit remained steadfast. Instead of a typical wedding registry, she and Sebastian launched a charitable campaign, urging guests to donate to various charities dear to their hearts, particularly those dedicated to children's education and healthcare. Overnight, their union wasn't just a celebrity spectacle, it became a fundraiser that raked in millions for noble causes. The young couple shone as philanthropic visionaries, a refreshing change from the usual extravaganza of idle wealth. When they returned from their honeymoon in Santorini, they got to work. Sebastian supported Clarissa in officially founding the Evelyn Wellington Foundation, named after her late mother, focusing on educating underprivileged girls around the world. Sebastian's hedge fund soared to new heights. His name became synonymous with brilliance. Major corporations and wealthy families sought him out for financial guidance. He was soon invited to speak at conferences, where he shared the stage with real heavyweights like Warren Buffett and Bill Gates. Success followed success. Their personal fortune ballooned, granting them membership in every prestigious club you could imagine. They were invited to exclusive gatherings in Davos, philanthropic summits in Tokyo, and high-stakes business meetings in Dubai. Clarissa, far from being just another socialite, sat on panels discussing global education, forging alliances with powerful women like Michelle Obama and Oprah Winfrey. The Farnsworths were the golden couple, and wherever they went, cameras followed, eager to document this modern fairy tale. But, as the years went by, subtle changes seeped into Sebastian. Where he once thrived on the satisfaction of moral, altruistic endeavors, a new hunger for prestige began to show. He kept long hours, citing international calls, emergency deals, or pressing business matters. Clarissa, busy with her foundation and their philanthropic engagements, overlooked these warning signs. She believed his dedication was fueled by the same convictions they once shared. She used to joke that Sebastian was married to his phone, but she never questioned his loyalty to her, at least, not then. There were fleeting moments, though, when uncertainty cast its shadow. Sebastian would forget important dates, like the anniversary of her mother's passing or the scheduled launch of a critical scholarship program. Once, he missed Clarissa's keynote speech in Zurich because of an urgent investor crisis that demanded his full attention. But whenever she confronted him, he'd shower her with heartfelt apologies and grand gestures like a surprise diamond necklace or an opulent weekend getaway to compensate for his absence. Clarissa, still enchanted by the memory of the man she had married, forgave him time and again. Beyond these minor hiccups, life maintained its gleaming veneer. They bought a breathtaking penthouse in Manhattan, often hosting dinners for the social elite. Among the illustrious guests were real philanthropic luminaries, such as Michael Bloomberg, who offered them additional avenues for global charitable contributions. The Farnsworth brand appeared unstoppable. Clarissa was convinced that underneath Sebastian's ambitious exterior, his love for her and for their shared cause still burned bright. It would take more than a hint of neglect or a skipped event to make her question the sanctity of their marriage. And yet, sometimes the loudest alarms ring silently. Under the lush exterior of glamorous parties and philanthropic triumphs, small cracks began appearing in the foundation of their marriage. A text message left unexplained. A rushed conversation on the phone that abruptly ended when Clarissa walked into the room. Familiar cologne on Sebastian's collar, yet it smelled just a shade different from his usual brand. All these were small anomalies, easily explained away if one wanted to believe wholeheartedly in a fairy tale. Clarissa believed in that fairy tale until it was ripped from her grasp. Clarissa was never prone to paranoia, but she was intuitive enough to sense changes in her husband's demeanor. While Sebastian had always been consumed by work, he now seemed distant in a way that words alone couldn't capture. His eyes seldom met hers for more than a moment before darting to his phone or laptop. He attended dinners, fundraisers, and galas as if in a daze, constantly checking messages as if expecting a call from someone more important. At first, Clarissa brushed off these observations as the side effects of mounting stress. Sebastian's hedge fund was taking on massive deals, from investing in developing markets to guiding high-profile celebrities in safeguarding their wealth. This expansion demanded international travel. Clarissa would hear about Sebastian jetting off to Singapore for a negotiation, only to find out he'd actually landed in Hong Kong. It didn't seem like deception so much as confusion, easy to mix up details when you're dealing with multiple time zones and crises. Then there were the abrupt mood swings. One evening, after a tense phone call he refused to discuss, Sebastian flew into a fit when Clarissa simply asked if everything was all right. He snapped that she was suffocating him with questions. Shocked and hurt, Clarissa retreated, leaving him alone in his office. Later that night, he apologized profusely, blaming the outburst on intense business pressure. Clarissa felt reassured by his contrition. After all, they had weathered stressful storms before without losing faith in one another. But deep inside, the seeds of suspicion sprouted. She noticed how Sebastian would meticulously erase his messages, something he had never bothered with before, or how he began asking for more privacy, installing new security measures on his devices. Clarissa, usually too preoccupied with her foundation, started paying closer attention, though she felt torn. She respected boundaries and believed in trusting her spouse. Still, her instincts whispered that something was off. In an attempt to reclaim their closeness, Clarissa planned a surprise weekend in the French Riviera, a nostalgic trip to the place they had spent part of their honeymoon. She arranged everything in secret, envisioning the joyous moment when she'd present him with plane tickets over a romantic candlelit dinner. But the night of her grand reveal, Sebastian came home past midnight, having forgotten their dinner date entirely. She didn't even have a chance to announce her surprise as he rushed upstairs to shower, still messaging someone on his phone. Sitting alone in the darkened living room, Clarissa felt a pang of heartache. This was not the man she married. The old Sebastian would have dropped everything to celebrate even the smallest milestones with her. When she finally made her way to their bedroom, Sebastian lay in bed, turned away, with his phone resting on the bedside table. She glimpsed the faint glow of the screen displaying an unanswered text, but the sender's name was obscured. The uneasy feelings only grew. Clarissa confided in her closest friend, Amelia Greywood, an attorney she had known since childhood. Amelia listened thoughtfully, cautioning Clarissa not to jump to conclusions. "Stress does strange things to people," Amelia said. "Have an honest talk with him. Let him know your concerns." Clarissa nodded. Honesty was the cornerstone of their relationship from the start, wasn't it? Yet, every time she tried to open a conversation, Sebastian deftly sidestepped it or drowned her in affectionate gestures until she forgot her own questions. But just like a wound left untreated, the doubts festered. Clarissa resolved that she would get to the bottom of this one way or another. Miles away in a different social sphere, Aria Levesque sipped a glass of champagne at the Châteauneuf-du-Pape vineyard in France. She gazed at the rolling countryside, her thoughts drifting to Sebastian Farnsworth. Aria was many things: elegant, cunning, and ruthlessly ambitious. Born in a modest family in Lyon, she had clawed her way through society by leveraging her beauty, charm, and wits. She was no stranger to relationships with affluent men, gleaning from each liaison something intangible she could use in her ascent. But Sebastian was different. Aria found him refreshing, not just because of his wealth, but for the mystique around him, the philanthropic side that contradicted the cutthroat world of high finance. She met him in Monaco during a business conference, one of those glitzy, star-studded affairs where millionaires rubbed shoulders with supermodels and playboys. Aria had been accompanying another businessman as his associate, though she loathed the euphemism. She was, for all intents and purposes, a social climber using any means available to ascend. Yet Sebastian transfixed her. His aura of controlled power sparked a challenge within her she had rarely felt. The affair began innocently enough, light, flirting over cocktails, a private conversation by the hotel pool, heated looks exchanged across the lavish banquet hall. But innocence quickly dissolved into something more tangled. Sebastian, usually guarded, opened up about his frustrations. He felt weighed down by the image of perfection he had to maintain with Clarissa. "She's too good, too flawless," he had confessed, swirling a glass of whiskey. "It's like living in a museum, always careful not to disturb anything." Aria listened, enthralled. She offered sympathy, validating feelings he was too ashamed to admit to anyone else. By the end of the conference, they had shared a passionate night in his penthouse suite. Sebastian swore it was a one-time slip. Arya pretended to agree, even though she sensed it was the start of something bigger. Over time, as they continued to meet in secret, Arya coaxed out more of Sebastian's vulnerabilities. He revealed how he sometimes felt overshadowed by Clarissa's philanthropic brilliance, how it seemed that every major figure they met was drawn to her more than to him. "I'm proud of her, don't get me wrong," he insisted, "but sometimes I want to be recognized for who I am, not just as her husband." Arya, adept at playing the perfect confidant, latched on to that hidden insecurity. She complimented his intelligence, admired his cunning business strategies, and fueled his need for recognition. Their affair deepened, becoming a potent mix of secret desire, flattery, and emotional dependency. Sebastian gifted her with expensive jewelry, Cartier bracelets, Tiffany pendants, bribes of affection and guilt. Arya was savvy enough to never request anything outright, letting Sebastian's conscience fill her pockets. Still, there was a limit to how hidden such an affair could remain. Arya, always 2 steps ahead, had started documenting their liaisons, photos, texts, even discreet audio recordings. Insurance for the future, she told herself. Not that she intended to blackmail him, at least. Not yet. But she had learned from bitter experience that powerful men could discard you in the blink of an eye. She intended never to be powerless again. In public, Arya maintained a profile that wouldn't raise eyebrows. She had an Instagram account brimming with picturesque travel photos, each seemingly innocent. Friends in high places. Networking at exclusive events. She had no obvious connection to Sebastian Farnsworth to the outside observer, but behind the scenes, her phone overflowed with messages and missed calls from him, intimate words and desperation. And so the stage was set for the storm that would soon engulf all their lives, Clarissa's, Sebastian's, and Arya's. For while Clarissa remained in the dark, Arya meticulously mapped her path to greater influence, and Sebastian found himself torn between guilt, desire, and the hollow comfort of his secret life. Clarissa's suspicion soon turned to restlessness. She could no longer ignore the inconsistencies piling up. Calls abruptly ending, strange credit card charges for lavish dinners at restaurants she'd never been to, and Sebastian's constant travels that never matched up with his official itinerary. After her conversation with Amelia, Clarissa resolved to have the talk with Sebastian, but every time she tried to address it, fate conspired to break the moment: a sudden phone call, a pressing business meeting, or Sebastian's temper flaring at the mention of interrogation. It wasn't until one night at their Manhattan penthouse that Clarissa decided enough was enough. She planned a simple dinner, cooking his favorite dish, coq au vin, and waiting for him at the dining table. He arrived past 9, tie loosened and eyes weary. There was a bouquet of roses in his hand, a gift that felt more like a peace offering than a romantic gesture. She motioned for him to sit. "Sebastian," she began, her voice wavering just slightly, "we need to talk." He appeared at once, guarded. "Can it wait until I shower? I had a terrible day." "No," Clarissa interrupted, softly but firmly. "I've been waiting for this talk for weeks." He sighed and set the roses down. As he did, Clarissa felt her resolve waver. She loved him. She truly did. She didn't want to ruin their dinner with accusations. But the truth needed to come out. Gently, she expressed her concerns, how he had become distant, how there were too many unexplained expenditures, suspicious phone calls, and missed dates. Sebastian's expression hardened, but he allowed her to finish. "Clarissa," he began, carefully choosing his words, "you have every right to worry, but I promise you, there's no one else. The business has been going through ups and downs, and I might have made some unwise decisions. Her heart pounded. Was he gambling their fortune away? What do you mean by unwise decisions? He quickly clarified that he'd taken larger risks in the hedge fund, strategies that could backfire. The late nights, cryptic calls, and erased messages, he insisted these were related to secret business deals he was working on, deals that required absolute confidentiality. I didn't want you to fret. I hoped to resolve them on my own. Clarissa studied him carefully. His gaze was steady, yet there was a flicker of something she couldn't quite read. Relief washed over her, but it was tempered by a nagging suspicion that not all was being revealed. Still, with tears in her eyes, she allowed him to embrace her. "I just want to know you're safe," she whispered. "Always," he said, holding her close. "I promise, Clarissa." For a fleeting moment, it felt as though everything was back to normal. They shared a subdued dinner, making small talk about the foundation and upcoming charitable events. Sebastian even laughed when she told him about a humorous incident at her latest board meeting. By the time they finished, Clarissa thought maybe she'd been overreacting. Maybe it truly was just business stress. She decided to give him the benefit of the doubt. Later that night, as Sebastian slept soundly, Clarissa found her thoughts drifting to the future. They had faced adversity before, negative press, corporate hostility, personal tragedy, but had always stood strong. Perhaps this was just another test of their bond. She turned to look at his sleeping form, reminded of the man who once spontaneously danced with her in the middle of a deserted street in Paris. The man who'd proposed with trembling hands, afraid she might say no. The man who, just hours earlier, had explained away every single suspicion she had. And yet, Clarissa couldn't quite stop the tiny voice in her head repeating, "He's lying." Though she wanted more than anything to ignore it, that voice grew louder in the quiet darkness. Days turned into weeks. Clarissa threw herself into the Evelyn Wellington Foundation's latest project, a scholarship program aimed at disadvantaged young women in Southeast Asia. She found solace in her work, in the tangible results of her efforts to change lives. Yet the tension at home never fully dissipated. Sebastian was polite, occasionally affectionate, but there was a layer of distance that lingered like a subtle perfume in the air. One evening, Clarissa hosted a small gathering at their penthouse to celebrate the scholarship program's successful launch. Guests included board members of the foundation, close friends, and a few high-profile donors. Among them was Sir James Holcombe, a revered philanthropist who had introduced Clarissa to Bill and Melinda Gates years prior. As Clarissa mingled, ensuring everyone felt welcome, she noticed Sebastian making small talk with guests. He looked the part of a gracious host, but every so often he'd check his phone with an anxious glance. After dinner, when the party had mostly died down, Clarissa found him sipping a brandy in the corner of the living room. She approached, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Everything all right?" He gave a start, nearly spilling his drink. "Yes, just a text from one of my clients. Might have to leave for Dubai sooner than planned." Clarissa frowned slightly, but forced a smile. "So soon?" Before he could respond, Sir James strolled over. "Wonderful evening, Clarissa," he said warmly. "Your mother would be so proud of the work you're doing." "Thank you, Sir James." "It means a lot to hear that from you," she replied with genuine warmth. Sir James then turned his attention to Sebastian. "I hear your business is expanding into renewable energy. Splendid." "I spoke to Richard Branson recently. He mentioned something about you spearheading a major project in the Caribbean." Sebastian's face brightened with a polished smile. "Yes, it's in the pipeline. Still early stages. But we're exploring innovative solutions for sustainable investments." Sir James's bushy eyebrows arched with interest. "We must chat more about it soon. I might be able to connect you with some folks in Barbados." As Sir James wandered off to say his goodbyes, Clarissa saw the flicker of restlessness in Sebastian's eyes. Once the last guest left, Sebastian retreated to his study without a word. She followed him, concerned. There she found him hunched over his desk, scrolling through messages on his phone. The door was cracked open, just enough for her to glimpse the tension etched into his face. "Sebastian," she called softly, "is there something you're not telling me?" He looked up, startled, and locked his phone. "Clarissa, please. I'm under a lot of pressure. It's business." She nodded slowly. "If it's about the hedge fund, I can help. We can strategize together, look for solutions." "No," he interrupted curtly, "I don't want you involved in this." Hurt, she took a step back. The harshness in his tone made it clear he wasn't in the mood for further discussion. Fighting back tears, she left him to brood. Where had the days gone when they'd share every triumph and setback with each other? That night, Clarissa lay awake, gazing at the glittering Manhattan skyline. The only sound was the hum of traffic below and the occasional siren wailing in the distance. She wondered if wealth and power had claimed another victim, transforming the husband she loved into a stranger. She prayed that it was just a temporary setback, a phase that would pass once whatever business crisis he faced was resolved. She would soon learn that no amount of hope could stand against the tsunami of betrayal poised to break over her life. The truth was waiting to be uncovered, whether she was ready or not. The Farnsworths' philanthropic ties brought them to Berlin for a high-profile forum aimed at combating global inequality. Clarissa was one of the keynote speakers, and Sebastian accompanied her as he always did for these major public appearances. Their arrival was greeted by flashing cameras. They posed for photographs together, smiling in a display of unity that the press devoured. Inside the conference hall, Clarissa's speech drew a standing ovation. She spoke passionately about eliminating gender disparities in education, highlighting the work of her foundation and the global partnerships essential for meaningful change. She made casual references to coordinating with high net worth individuals like Bill Gates, emphasizing collaboration over competition. When she finished, the applause was thunderous. Sebastian stood, clapping with the rest of the crowd, wearing that familiar proud expression she'd fallen in love with years ago. During the lunch break, Clarissa was swarmed by admirers, fellow philanthropists, and journalists looking for a soundbite. Sebastian lingered at her side, whispering compliments, praising her eloquence. It was a rare moment in which they appeared to be the once indestructible duo. Their synergy was almost palpable. But as Clarissa worked the room, Sebastian's phone buzzed repeatedly. With each glance at the screen, his expression grew more anxious. Eventually, he leaned in and said, "I need to take care of something. I'll be back soon." She watched him slip away, guilt flickering across his face. For a moment, she wanted to follow, but the crowd demanded her attention. By the time she extricated herself, Sebastian was gone. Hours later, after the forum's panel discussions, Clarissa tried calling him. No answer. Confusion gnawed at her as she left voice messages. Her texts went unanswered. It wasn't until late evening that he returned, disheveled, apologizing profusely. "I ran into a major investor and got caught up in negotiations," he claimed. "Couldn't step away." Exhausted, Clarissa chose to believe him, though her instincts bristled. She hated the doubt that tinged their every interaction. The old Clarissa, so full of faith in her husband, was slipping away, replaced by a woman who was constantly bracing for heartbreak. The next day at the forum, Clarissa participated in a strategic roundtable with influential philanthropists. One participant, Baroness Elizabeth Rothstein, inquired after Sebastian's whereabouts. "We were supposed to chat about new joint ventures, but he hasn't shown up," she said. Clarissa felt a sinking dread in her stomach. She mustered a polite smile and promised to pass along a message to him. But when the session ended and Clarissa checked her phone, there was no update from Sebastian. She wandered through the convention center's expansive corridors, scanning every face for her husband. She caught sight of a tall figure slipping out a side exit, phone pressed to his ear. She recognized the slope of his shoulders, Sebastian. Quickening her pace, Clarissa made her way through the exit, only to find him in heated conversation, his tone urgent and hushed. When Sebastian noticed her, he abruptly ended the call. "Clarissa," he said, startled. "I was just finishing up a phone meeting." "Who was that?" she asked softly, heart pounding. "A client." "I can't divulge details," he said curtly, slipping his phone into his pocket. Clarissa searched his eyes. There was a tension there, a guardedness he'd never displayed before. For a moment, she thought she smelled a faint trace of a perfume that was definitely not hers. She almost mentioned it, but stopped. If she accused him outright without proof, it would create an even bigger rift. Instead, she simply nodded, feigning acceptance. That evening, they attended the closing banquet together. Clarissa maintained appearances, laughing and clinking glasses with other attendees. Sebastian performed his role impeccably, lauding her achievements with affectionate remarks. On the surface, it was a glamorous display of a supportive marriage, the golden Farnsworth couple. But beneath the sparkle of crystal chandeliers and the swirl of evening gowns, Clarissa felt a tremor in the foundation of their lives. She could sense that the entire edifice was on the brink of collapse, ready to shatter under the weight of secrets and lies. Returning to London, Clarissa confronted the swirling doubts that had kept her awake at night. Amelia's counsel echoed in her mind: if you suspect something, find the truth even if it hurts. Taking the advice to heart, Clarissa decided to hire a private investigator, knowing full well she was crossing a line she'd never imagined crossing. Trust in a marriage was paramount, but at this point, ignorance was simply prolonging her agony. Through a discreet referral, she contacted Robert Hansen, a veteran investigator who had built a reputation on solving the unsolvable. He was a tall, wiry man with piercing green eyes that suggested he'd seen it all. Their first meeting took place in a quiet cafe on the outskirts of town, far from prying eyes. Clarissa arrived in a simple coat and sunglasses, nervously checking her surroundings before stepping inside. Hansen listened patiently as she described her suspicions, Sebastian's odd behavior, the unexplained absences, the credit card statements from exclusive restaurants. She handed him a folder filled with her notes, itemized logs of instances that had seemed suspicious. Hansen leafed through them, scribbling occasional remarks in a small notebook. "When did you start noticing changes?" he asked, his voice calm, deliberate. "About 6 months ago," Clarissa admitted. "He began traveling more. At first, I didn't question it. He's a busy man. But lately it's felt like he's almost living a double life." Hansen nodded thoughtfully. "I'll need access to his travel itineraries, phone logs if possible, any social media accounts. Discretion is paramount. If there's something there, I'll find it." Clarissa felt a pang of guilt. She worried she was betraying Sebastian by resorting to these measures. But she reassured herself that if he was indeed innocent, Hansen would confirm it. Then she could lay her doubts to rest and focus on repairing their marriage. If, however, her worst fears proved true, she needed to know. Within a few days, Hansen's investigation was underway. Clarissa felt a swirl of emotions, relief at taking proactive steps, and a deepening dread that the answers might ruin her life. She found it increasingly difficult to face Sebastian each morning, forcing a smile when he kissed her goodbye, unsure if he was returning to the office or to another woman's arms. Late one evening, Hansen sent Clarissa a text. "We need to meet." Her stomach clenched. She arranged for another discreet rendezvous, this time at a dimly lit bar in Soho. She arrived early, sipping water while anxiously drumming her fingers on the table. Hansen slipped in quietly and took a seat across from her. He looked grave. "I have preliminary findings," he began. Your husband has been in frequent contact with a woman named Aria Levesque. They've met multiple times at high-end hotels, Claridge's in London, the Hotel de Crillon in Paris, and recently in Berlin. Clarissa's world blurred. She felt the weight of the name Aria pressing against her chest. She couldn't speak. Hansen continued gently, "I'm sorry, Miss Farnsworth. But from what I've gathered, it seems like an ongoing affair. There are photographs as well, should you need them." Her mind spun, a vortex of betrayal and heartbreak. At that moment, Clarissa wished she could unlearn everything Hansen had just told her. But the seeds of doubt had sprouted into poisonous truth. She had the answer she both craved and dreaded. Pushing back tears, she thanked Hansen and took his folder of evidence, scarcely noticing that she was leaving the bar without even touching her drink. Outside, the London night seemed colder than usual, the city lights strangely distant. Her instincts had been right all along, but the knowledge brought no comfort, only heartbreak, and the grim realization that her fairy tale marriage might be irrevocably doomed. Sebastian Farnsworth's life was spiraling out of control. Even as he juggled multi-million-dollar deals behind the polished facade, he felt a creeping sense of dread. Lies were piling on top of lies. Each day, Aria demanded more of his time, and he couldn't resist her allure. Yet he also couldn't bear the thought of losing Clarissa, the woman whose integrity and grace had defined his best self. Sometimes, in the stillness of his office late at night, he wondered how he had let things go this far. He recalled the early days with Clarissa, how her unwavering kindness and love for humanity had drawn him like a moth to flame. He missed the simplicity of their shared dreams, traveling the world to champion good causes, forging partnerships that brought hope to marginalized communities. But as his hedge fund grew, so did his appetite for success. He found himself drawn to the high-stakes environment of wealth and power, a web that Aria exploited with remarkable skill. Aria was never just a fling. She was a living testament to the power of seduction. She gave Sebastian a sense of rebellion against the perfect image he felt compelled to maintain. With her, he could express frustrations that he dared not reveal to Clarissa. He convinced himself that the affair was an emotional release, something that would never truly threaten his marriage. But as the months passed, the lines blurred. He was now lying to both women, helplessly ensnared in a labyrinth of secrets. There were moments he hated himself, like when Aria would text him an ultimatum, and he'd drop everything to appease her. Or when Clarissa gave him a trusting smile, and he responded with a half-truth about a business trip. He told himself he was protecting Clarissa from heartbreak, yet in reality, he was simply prolonging the inevitable. On a rare night when he found himself alone, Sebastian stood by the window of his London office, gazing at the city skyline. The glass reflected back a man he scarcely recognized. He raked a hand through his hair, heart thudding with unease. Financially, he was at the top of his game. His name was recognized in boardrooms worldwide. Yet, on a personal level, he was bankrupt, morally compromised by deception. He recalled an incident from his childhood. He had once lied to his grandmother, his beloved mentor, about breaking her antique vase. The guilt had consumed him until he finally confessed. She forgave him instantly, but delivered a warning he never forgot. A lie can weigh more than any burden you'll ever carry. He had scoffed at the time, but now that weight felt like an anchor dragging him into a bottomless sea. He texted Aria, making excuses as to why he couldn't see her that week. Then he sat down and began drafting an email to Clarissa. He typed, deleted, and typed again, trying to put into words the tangle in his heart. But how could he confess to her via email? How could he admit that the man she had placed on a pedestal was deeply flawed? Every attempt ended in frustration. He closed his laptop, burying his face in his hands. As midnight approached, he made a silent resolution. Once the next major deal closed, He would extricate himself from the affair and mend the rift in his marriage. One last big score, he told himself, then I'll make things right. But little did he realize that secrets have a life of their own, and the illusions he was weaving were about to come crashing down far sooner than he expected. Clarissa sat alone in her bedroom, the folder of evidence from Robert Hansen spread out on the bed. Photographs of Sebastian and Aria holding hands, kissing, entering hotels together. Each image was more damning than the last. Her eyes stung with tears, but she forced herself to look, to fully absorb the reality of her shattered marriage. She placed a trembling hand over her mouth, trying to stifle a sob. The images told a story of betrayal that stretched from London to Paris to Berlin. Everything Clarissa had feared was true, but what hurt the most was the depth of Sebastian's duplicity. He had lied repeatedly, while gazing into her eyes with apparent sincerity. She tried to make sense of it. How could the man who championed ethical investments, who donated millions to charity, who publicly professed devotion to her, be the same man sneaking off with another woman in luxury hotels? Part of her wanted to believe there was a mistake, but the evidence was incontrovertible. Amelia arrived shortly afterward, summoned by a frantic phone call. She found Clarissa surrounded by the scattered photos and written reports. Without a word, Amelia rushed to her friend's side, enveloping her in a comforting embrace. Clarissa collapsed into sobs, her tears soaking Amelia's blouse. Between sobs, Clarissa managed to speak. How could he do this? Why would he betray everything we built together? Amelia's features hardened with protective anger. I don't know, but you don't deserve this. We'll figure out the next steps, okay? Clarissa nodded, wiping her eyes. I need to see him. I need him to tell me to my face. In that moment, she knew this confrontation could change her life forever, but she couldn't live under illusions any longer. She waited for Sebastian to return home that evening, adrenaline fueling her resolve. He walked in casually, loosening his tie, his expression lighting up at the sight of her. Hey, I was thinking maybe we could. His voice trailed off as he noticed the pictures fanned out on the coffee table. His face went ashen. Clarissa, let me explain, he began, his voice shaky. She stood, arms folded, her face etched with pain. Explain what? That you've been lying to me? That while I poured my heart into our foundation, you were sneaking around with her? Her voice trembled, but she refused to crumble. Sebastian's eyes flickered with shame. It was a mistake, he said, raking a hand through his hair. It started out of, I don't know. I was confused. I was under pressure. It just happened. It just happened. Clarissa echoed bitterly. We promised each other honesty. We built a life founded on trust. How could you do this? He took a step closer, guilt weighing on him. I never meant to hurt you, Clarissa. I swear I love you. She glanced away, tears sliding down her cheeks. You can't claim to love me and do this. That's not how love works. The room seemed to close in around them, thick with heartbreak. Sebastian opened his mouth to plead further, but Clarissa raised a trembling hand. I need time, she said. Don't sleep here tonight. I can't look at you without seeing those pictures. He nodded, tears forming in his own eyes. I understand. I'm sorry. The gravity of his betrayal hung in the air like a sentence. He gathered some belongings and left in silence. Once the door shut, Clarissa collapsed onto the sofa, sobbing. There was no immediate comfort, no easy salve for her wound. This was the moment she had dreaded, but she also felt a strange sense of relief. The lie was no longer crouching in the shadows. The truth was out, and though it tore her heart, it was hers to confront. In the aftermath, Clarissa went into a kind of emotional lockdown. She avoided social events, leaving Amelia and her board members to helm any urgent foundation business. She couldn't bear the inevitable questions about Sebastian's absence. Instead, She spent long hours in bed or pacing through the silent rooms of their London residence, haunted by memories of happier times. Aria Levesque, meanwhile, found herself at a crossroads. Sebastian had stopped responding to her texts. Alarmed by his sudden distance, she toyed with the idea of exposing the affair to force his hand, but she wasn't entirely sure how Clarissa would react. Aria thrived on control. Unpredictability was her enemy. For the first time, she realized she might lose the power she had held over Sebastian, the power that ensured he showered her with gifts and attention. She decided to reach out through one last bold move, a call placed directly to Clarissa Farnsworth. Clarissa almost dropped her phone when she recognized the name on the caller ID. On instinct, she rejected the call, her heart pounding in her chest. But when Aria texted her, claiming she wanted to discuss Sebastian's future, Clarissa felt an odd compulsion to face the other woman. They agreed to meet at a discreet cafe in Chelsea the following afternoon. Sitting across a small round table from Aria, Clarissa couldn't help but notice the woman's poise. Aria was undeniably beautiful, with sharp cheekbones, immaculate makeup, and an aura of self-assurance. Her piercing brown eyes met Clarissa's with neither shame nor apology. "I wanted to see you," Aria began smoothly, "to clarify that Sebastian doesn't owe me anything. Whatever happens next is up to him and you." Clarissa's voice quivered with anger. "This isn't just about transactions, Miss Levesque. You've been sleeping with my husband. I'm not sure you grasp the devastation you've caused." Aria sipped her tea calmly. "I understand your pain, but don't act like I manipulated him into something he didn't want. Sebastian was a willing participant." Clarissa's expression hardened. "Do you think I care who initiated it? You both betrayed me." Aria nodded, unflinching. "I suppose you want to know what kind of relationship we had. The answer, deeper than mere lust. He confided in me about his insecurities, about feeling overshadowed. How dare you?" Clarissa interjected, tears threatening to spill. "You have no right to talk about my husband's feelings as if you understand him better than I do." Aria's eyes flashed. "Maybe I do. Did you ever see Sebastian's frustration with being the second star in your philanthropic sky? You're always the saint, the perfect wife. He was suffocating." Clarissa stood abruptly, hands trembling. "This conversation is over. Don't ever contact me again." She turned and walked away, fury mingling with heartbreak. Aria's words echoed in her mind. He was suffocating. Part of Clarissa feared there was a kernel of truth in it. Had she somehow neglected Sebastian's emotional needs? Reeling from the encounter, Clarissa called Amelia, who arrived at the cafe moments later. Clarissa broke down, recounting every detail. Amelia listened, trying to comfort her friend. "Don't let her poison your thoughts," Amelia said firmly. "Sebastian made his own choices." Clarissa nodded, but deep inside, she felt battered by conflicting emotions. Yes, Sebastian had betrayed her, but was there a deeper fissure in their marriage that she'd overlooked? She returned home utterly drained, longing for the sanctuary of simpler times. Yet she knew she was changed forever. No matter how events unfolded, she could never again be the wide-eyed optimist who believed in fairy tale endings. Word of the Farnsworth marital crisis leaked into elite circles, whispering rumors that spread with ruthless efficiency. Society pages speculated about Sebastian's absence at Clarissa's side, while paparazzi snapped pictures of Clarissa appearing visibly distraught. On social media, armchair commentators tried to guess the cause, some attributing it to business disputes, others claiming it was a classic tale of rich husband gets bored. Desperate to contain the damage, Sebastian reached out to Clarissa, begging for a meeting. At first, she refused. But after days of his persistent calls and tearful voicemails, she agreed to see him at Amelia's office. a neutral ground that offered some emotional distance. Dressed simply in black trousers and a cream-colored blouse, Clarissa took a seat across the table from Sebastian. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, hair disheveled. Amelia sat quietly to the side, ready to intervene if things escalated. Sebastian began with a heartfelt apology. "I know I've hurt you in the worst possible way. I can't even find the words to express my regret." Clarissa folded her hands on the table, maintaining composure. "Why, Sebastian, how could you do it? Was our life not enough for you?" He swallowed hard, tears glistening. "I was selfish, insecure. You were shining so brightly, and I felt overshadowed. Aria offered an escape, a place where I was the center. It was a terrible decision, and I know I don't deserve forgiveness." Clarissa shook her head, her voice tremulous. "You should have talked to me. I would have listened, tried to understand. But now, you've torn us apart." They lapsed into a tense silence, broken only by Sebastian's choked sob. "I ended it with Aria. She means nothing to me compared to you. I want to fix this, Clarissa. I'll do whatever it takes." Amelia interjected calmly. "Clarissa needs to decide what's best for her. You should respect that." Over the next hour, the two navigated the emotional wreckage. Sebastian begged for another chance, promising therapy, time away from business, anything to rebuild trust. Clarissa, however, was hesitant. The betrayal was fresh, her wounds still bleeding. She didn't know if therapy or grand gestures could restore the innocence of their bond. "I need space," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Time to think, to decide if I can ever trust you again. And in that time, I don't want you pushing me. Do you understand?" Sebastian nodded, tears spilling onto his cheeks. "I understand. I'm so sorry." Leaving Amelia's office, Clarissa felt more exhausted than ever. Part of her ached to take Sebastian back. Her heart still yearned for the man she loved. Yet she also felt anger, a sense of betrayal so profound it threatened to overshadow every happy memory they'd shared. Back at her penthouse, Clarissa found herself confronted by more than just her marriage problems. The press had gotten wind of something big, rumored financial irregularities in Sebastian's hedge fund. She turned on the TV to see a news anchor discussing possible investigations into Farnsworth Capital for insider trading. Stunned, Clarissa realized that Sebastian's problems ran deeper than infidelity. Now, more than just her personal life was at stake. The philanthropic empire they built together, their reputations, everything was on a precarious edge. As the reality sank in, Clarissa understood she had decisions to make that would define not just her future, but the legacy of the Evelyn Wellington Foundation as well. Sebastian's betrayal was painful enough, but if he was also implicated in something illegal, the fallout could be catastrophic for their shared causes. She stared at the screen, heart pounding, wondering if it was all crumbling before her eyes. In the weeks that followed, Clarissa grappled with a maelstrom of emotions and events. The allegations against Farnsworth Capital escalated, bringing unwelcome media scrutiny. Suddenly, every aspect of Sebastian's life was under the microscope. Journalists dug into his financial records, searching for evidence of wrongdoing. Investors grew skittish, leading to massive withdrawals that shook the hedge fund's stability. Sebastian denied any illegal activity. He insisted that while he had taken some risky bets, everything was above board. Still, Clarissa knew better than most how truth could be bent, especially in the high-stakes world of finance. She kept her distance, focusing on the foundation and damage control. The last thing she wanted was for their philanthropic work to be tainted by scandal. Amid the chaos, Aria Levesque made one final move. She scheduled a press conference to clear the air. People expected a salacious tell all about her affair with Sebastian, but instead, Aria shocked everyone by focusing on Farnsworth Capital's questionable deals. She presented documents suggesting insider knowledge, hinting that Sebastian might have leveraged personal relationships with politicians and corporations to gain an unfair advantage. The press devoured the scandal, painting Sebastian as a cunning manipulator who cheated not just on his wife, but on the very financial systems he claimed to serve ethically. Clarissa watched the press conference in disbelief, feeling a surge of conflicting emotions: betrayal, pity, resentment, and a strange sense of vindication that Arya's manipulative ways were finally exposed. Panicked calls flooded Clarissa's phone from donors and board members demanding to know if the foundation was involved. Clarissa was forced to hold an emergency board meeting. With a heavy heart, she assured them that the foundation's finances were separate and clean. Though it stung, she also recommended distancing the foundation's public image from Sebastian until investigations concluded. Finally, battered by shame and personal turmoil, Sebastian reached out one last time, begging Clarissa to meet him. This time she agreed, though she insisted the meeting take place in her father's estate in the countryside, a place removed from paparazzi lenses and corporate boardrooms. She arrived early, wandering the estate's manicured gardens, recalling a time when she believed love conquered all. Sebastian appeared at noon, looking haggard and wearing clothes that were wrinkled from too many nights spent outside his home. They strolled through the gardens in silence until they reached a quiet bench under an ancient oak tree. Clarissa took a seat, steeling her resolve to say what needed to be said. He collapsed onto the bench beside her. "I'm sorry," he said, voice cracking. "I've lost everything: my reputation, my investors, you." Clarissa closed her eyes briefly, fighting back tears. "I can't believe I'm asking this. But was anything real, Sebastian? Were we real?" His voice trembled. "Yes. With you, it was always real. I let my ambitions and insecurities ruin us. I wish I could turn back time." She studied him, noting the regret etched into his features. Part of her wanted to comfort him, but she remembered the betrayal and the lies. "What you did, I can't just forget it. It wasn't one mistake. It was months, maybe years of lying." Sebastian nodded, silent tears escaping down his cheeks. "I'll sign whatever you want. If you want a divorce, I won't fight it." Clarissa's chest tightened at the finality of that word, divorce. Once they had dreamed of growing old together, traveling the world hand in hand. Now they were discussing a legal end to those vows. "I don't know," she said hoarsely. "I need time. I need to heal. For now, we have to protect the foundation, our staff, the people we serve. I can't afford to let your personal crisis destroy everything we built." He lowered his gaze. "I understand." They sat there, enveloped in the hush of the countryside, the once happy couple now separated by an impenetrable wall of hurt. Eventually, Sebastian rose, gave her a final lingering look, and walked away. Clarissa remained on the bench, staring at the distant horizon, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. She realized that even with all the wealth, influence, and good intentions in the world, they were not immune to human frailties, temptation, insecurity, and the consequences of betrayal. In that moment, she felt a glimmer of hope that she could rebuild her life. It might not be the fairy tale she once envisioned, but perhaps it could be something stronger, a life forged from truth rather than illusions. For now, the future was uncertain, but at least she stood on the solid ground of reality. There were no more lies to hide behind, only the courage to face whatever came next. Betrayal, heartbreak, and scandal nearly tore Clarissa's world apart, but they also forced her to confront painful truths and reclaim her life. While Sebastian grapples with the wreckage of his downfall, Clarissa emerges as a resilient survivor, committed to her philanthropic vision, no longer overshadowed by illusions of a perfect marriage. Thank you for joining me on this emotional journey. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, please remember to like, share, and subscribe to my channel. Every click of support helps me continue bringing you stories that stir the heart and mind. Spread the word to friends who love tales of drama and redemption, and let me know in the comments what you think about Clarissa's choices. Should she forgive Sebastian or begin a new chapter on her own? Together, let's keep the conversation alive and the hope for second chances burning bright.